I tell people all the time that I do not have all the answers. Nobody's got all the answers, but I got some of the answers. And one of the things I've learned is the key to happiness. You want to be a happy person? I know how to be a happy person. And I'll tell you where I really learned it was from my grandpa. My grandpa, as a young man, was him and all of his friends were a little afraid that they were going to get drafted because the world looked like it was heading toward a second world war. And sure enough, in June of 1941, he was drafted into the Army for a 6-month tour of duty. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. But if you know your history, he started in June of 41, then July, August, September, October, November. He was about to get out in December when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And the United States was officially dragged into World War II. Well, he got assigned to the 119th Field Artillery Regiment. And as he was training to go overseas, he had a cool little experience that I actually have something on my wall here in my office from my grandpa. That one day when he was training, he set his hat down and a little puppy dog ran and jumped into his hat and was sitting there. And he snapped a picture of it and sent it off to the National Snapshot Awards. And he actually won an award, a certificate of merit that I have here. I'll show it right here. And he won the prize for that. He won for honorable mention was $25, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but that's more than he made in a month. He made $21 a month in the Army. And in today's dollars, that's $400. And so that's not too shabby. And so it's one of my favorite possessions I have because it's a kind of a cool thing from my grandpa's past. And something really cool is that if you look down at the bottom, they have the signatures of all the judges in this contest. And one of them was Walter Disney. It's kind of cool that he signed this thing. And that's back before he was a household name. I think they had already, Walt Disney had already made Snow White and Pinocchio. But that was, when my grandpa won this award, it was like less than a month before the movie Bambi came out and like 13 years before Disneyland opened up. And so Walt Disney was not a household name at the time. So that's kind of a cool thing. Then Grandpa was sent off to Officer Candidate School down at Fort Sill in Oklahoma and received the commission of second lieutenant. And then in 1945, sure enough, he was shipped overseas and was sent to the Philippines where the war was happening hot and heavy. And in June of 1945, he was serving as an artillery forward observer with the 148th Infantry Regiment during the drive up the Cagayan Valley in northern Luzon. Now, you may or may not know what it means to be a forward artillery observer, but, in today's wars, they have drones and satellites, and they use those to guide missiles and rockets and mortars onto their targets. Well, back then, they would just send a person up to the high ground, and he would call in on a walkie-talkie where they were supposed to, drop their bombs and shoot their rockets. And the enemy, once they started getting bombed, would say, we got to kill this forward observer. He's got to be somewhere. He's probably up here in the high ground, and they'd start bombing those. Those people had a life expectancy in that role of less than 24 hours. Well, my grandpa survived doing that for weeks during this campaign. He was awarded in 1945 the Bronze Star for his exemplary service. And the war was won in 1945, and he came home. And didn't come home a massive hero or anything. He became a plumber. He was a master plumber. And his life took a turn when he was 41 years old. He started having some difficulty with his arms and his hands and his limbs. He said one time he went roller skating and was having just a hard time controlling his legs, and he knew something was wrong. So ended up going to the doctor and getting checked out, and he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And if you don't know much about that disease, it causes you to slowly lose control of different parts of your body and eventually end up totally paralyzed. And so he had to walk with a cane, and then had to be in a wheelchair. And by the time I came along as his grandson, he was in a wheelchair the whole time that I knew him. And but I got to tell you, my grandpa was the happiest person you'd ever meet. He was always singing a song, always whistling a tune. He always had a joke. He invented dad puns. He was like the king of grandpa puns. And he was always a happy guy. And when I was a kid, I'm not sure I totally understand it. But now with some perspective, I do understand it, because Grandpa always looked for ways to serve other people. What he realized after he got diagnosed with MS is that a lot of people, when they get diagnosed with something like that, they go through depression, they go through doubt, they have a lot of problems. So he started a local chapter of the MS Society and served as a chaplain and a counselor and an advisor for other people. As life went on, he kind of had an affinity for audio. He had like a studio in his house where he had all these reel-to-reel audio tapes, and he would record the sermons at church and then dub them over reel-to-reel for other shut-ins and people that couldn't make it out to church. When the Vietnam War broke out, Grandpa would let families of servicemen that lived in his area in Bay City, Michigan, come to his house and record an audio tape that he would then ship via the Red Cross over to Vietnam for their family members to be able to hear the voices of their family. We take for granted today that anybody can just make a call or send a text or a voicemail. But back in those days, for someone serving in Vietnam to get a Merry Christmas audio tape from their loved ones was oftentimes a matter of life and death for some of these people. I remember watching him as he slowly lost control of his legs and then his left arm and then most of his right arm, that he really had control of just one finger that he would use to control an electric wheelchair. But he would also take that finger and he would type on a typewriter. And every month he would write a newsletter for his local church, for the people who were the kids who were in college, or the people serving in the military. But he was always his whole life focused on other people. When he eventually passed away, I was reading his obituary, and they talked to one of the nurses who worked at the nursing home where he lived in the last days of his life. And she said most people that were going through the kind of pain that he was in are very sad. They're miserable. And he was always happy. He always had a joke. And so the lesson I learned from my grandpa, and I'd like to share with you, is I'm convinced that the key to happiness is to take your eyes off yourself and serve other people. It's been my experience in life that unhappy people share a couple of characteristics. One of those characteristics is they think about the same thing all day, every day. And that is they think about their own problems. They think about how hard they got it. They're looking for other people to blame. And happy people, conversely, all seem to have one thing in common, that they don't think about themselves, they think about others. They always find a way to be a blessing. And I'm convinced that it's what my grandpa did. He was happy right up until the day that he died. He was an amazing man. He set a great example for his kids and for all of his grandkids, and very, very thankful for it. No matter what you're going through in life, there's other people that are going through things too. And by focusing on helping them, it takes some of the burden off you and some of the pressure off you. It helps you count your blessings. What my grandpa was able to do, if you talk to him about why he was so happy, it really was two things. Number one, it was that he had hope. Now, he was a Christian, and so grandpa found his hope in his faith, that he believed with all of his heart that he was going to get to heaven and he was going to have a brand new body and he was going to have legs that worked. My grandma actually asked me to read his favorite poem at his funeral that was all about a house that was breaking down and in disrepair, but then up in heaven there was a whole nother mansion, and it was a metaphor about his heavenly body that he was expecting. And so he had hope, and he also had love, the love that shined through in his service to others. And I know he taught that to my dad. My dad's the first guy to help somebody across the street who needs help, or to stop and pull over and help somebody for a flat tire. Or when I was a kid, I used to be so embarrassed because my dad would see a father taking a picture of his wife and their kids, and my dad would say, "Oh, you want me to take a picture with all of you?" And they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, would you?" And he would take their picture. And I used to be like, Dad, it's so awkward. Now, if anyone's ever hung out with me at a theme park or any tourist, I'm that guy now too. I'm like, "Hey, let me take a picture with you. Let me take a picture of you guys. Let me take a picture." And but I'm just convinced that this spirit of helping others, that is the key to happiness. If you want to have peace, if you want to have joy, I think there's some other spiritual things that you got to learn. But if you just want to be happy, take your eyes off yourself, serve other people, just like my grandpa did. Robert Joyner, a great man, and I'm really, really proud to be his grandson.